The morning Owen Hartley drove away without paying, Marcus Aldridge didn't chase him down the street. He stood at the counter of his electrical repair shop in Ridgemont, British Columbia, watching the silver pickup disappear around the corner of Maple and 3rd, and the only thing he did was fold the unpaid invoice in half and set it quietly beside the register. His daughter Becca was 7 years old, and she was sitting cross-legged on the floor behind the front counter, coloring a horse in a coloring book her grandmother had sent from Manitoba. She looked up when the truck left. She always noticed. "Did that man forget to pay?" she asked. Marcus picked up a wrench and turned back toward the workbench. "I think so." Becca looked at the door, then back at her father. "Should we call him?" "Already tried," Marcus said. "3 times this week." She thought about that for a moment, her crayon hovering above the page. "Is that bad?" Marcus kept his eyes on the circuit board in front of him. The repair had taken him 4 hours. He had driven out to the Hartley property twice to diagnose the problem, once in the rain. Owen Hartley had been friendly enough through the whole process, the way people were friendly when they wanted something from you. The moment the invoice appeared, that friendliness had somewhere else to be. "It's not great," Marcus said honestly. Becca went back to her coloring. She was quiet for a minute, which with her meant she was thinking hard. "Mom would have been mad," she finally said. Marcus let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yeah," he said softly. "She would have." That was true. Carol had been the kind of person who believed firmly in fairness and had no trouble saying so out loud. She had been gone for 3 years now, taken by an illness that moved faster than any of them expected, and Marcus still caught himself at least once a day turning to say something to someone who wasn't there anymore. He had learned to redirect those moments. They didn't get easier exactly. They just got more familiar. He put in another hour of work before closing up, helped Becca with her reading homework on the drive home, made chicken and rice for dinner, and listened to her talk about the caterpillar her class had found at recess. He did not mention Owen Hartley again. He did not think about the $340 the job had cost him in time and parts. He put Becca to bed, sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes with a cup of tea he forgot to drink, and then went to sleep. What he did not know was that someone had watched the entire exchange that afternoon. Owen Hartley was not an especially bad man. That was almost the harder part of it. He was the regional director of a mid-sized property development firm called Northland Builds, a company with a reasonable reputation and a tidy website. He drove a truck he didn't need and wore a jacket that cost what Marcus made in a slow week. He had pulled into Ridgemont Electric on the recommendation of a colleague who assured him the rates were fair and the work was honest. Both of those things were true. The work Marcus had done on the generator system at Hartley's weekend property outside town was careful and precise. The wiring issue had stumped 2 other contractors. Marcus had found it in under 2 hours, but when he handed Owen the invoice for $340, Owen had looked at it the way people look at a parking ticket. Not angry exactly, just disbelieving. As though the number existed in a different category from the thing it was attached to. "I'll transfer it this week," Owen had said. He never did. Marcus followed up once by phone, once by text, once by a short, polite email that took him 15 minutes to word correctly, so it wouldn't sound like he was accusing Owen of anything. Owen opened the email. Marcus could see the read receipt. No reply came. What Marcus had not noticed because he was focused on the invoice, and then on Becca, and then on closing up the shop, was the dark blue hatchback parked along the curb across from his building. Inside it sat a woman named June Hartley. She was 63 years old, Owen's mother, and she had been in Ridgemont visiting a friend from her nursing years. She had walked past Marcus's shop window that afternoon, intending to go to the bakery 2 doors down. Instead, something had caught her attention, and she had stopped. She had watched the whole thing through the window, Owen dismissing the invoice. Owen shaking Marcus's hand with the easy confidence of someone who had already decided. Owen leaving without his wallet, ever leaving his jacket. She had sat in her car for a long time afterward. June Hartley had grown up poor in a small town outside Lethbridge, Alberta. Her husband Frank had worked in a granary for 22 years. She knew exactly what $340 meant to a small business owner with a child to feed. She also knew her son. She picked up her phone and called her brother Gerald, who was a retired chartered accountant living in Kelowna, and who had spent 40 years being very careful about where money went and why. "I need you to find out about someone for me," she said. "A man named Marcus Aldridge. He has an electrical repair shop in Ridgemont." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "This about Owen again?" "Just find out," June said. The week after Owen drove away without paying, Marcus fixed a broken fuse panel for a retired schoolteacher on Riverside Drive and charged her half his normal rate because he had known her for 6 years, and she was on a pension. He repaired a commercial oven for a Vietnamese family who ran a restaurant downtown, stayed 2 hours late to finish the job so they wouldn't lose the Friday dinner rush, and accepted a container of spring rolls as partial payment because they were short on cash that week, and he didn't want to make it awkward. He picked Becca up from school every day at 3:15. On Tuesdays, he took her to a swimming lesson at the community center. On Thursday evenings, they walked down to the waterfront and fed the ducks with old bread, which was something Carol had started, and they had both refused to stop. He was not performing any of this. He was simply living. Gerald Hutchins found out about him anyway. Gerald was methodical the way retired accountants tend to be. He spoke to the owner of the hardware store on 5th Street, who described Marcus as the kind of person who returned borrowed things on time and remembered people's names. He spoke to the principal of Ridgemont Elementary, who mentioned that Marcus had quietly donated a new set of tools to the school's woodworking program after hearing it was underfunded. He spoke to a city councilor who knew Marcus through the local business association and said, without being asked to summarize his character, that Marcus Aldridge was one of those people who made a community actually function. Gerald wrote everything down in a small notebook. Then he called June. "He sounds like the real thing," Gerald said. "I know," June said. "I could tell. So what are you going to do?" June had been thinking about that since she sat in the car outside the shop. She had been thinking about it in the way you think about something that has already been decided, when you're just waiting for your mind to catch up to what your gut already knows. "I've been meaning to do something useful with some of the money Frank left," she said. "I just hadn't found the right place for it." Gerald was quiet. "June, we're talking about what exactly?" "Something that matters," she said. "And someone who deserves it." She paused. "And Owen needs to learn something, Gerald. He's my son and I love him, but I raised him better than that." Marcus opened the shop on a Tuesday in October and found an envelope that had been slid under the door overnight. He assumed it was a bill or a quote from a supplier and set it on the counter to open later. He had 2 jobs booked that morning, a panel upgrade out on the Concord Road property and a warranty inspection for a new build on the east side of town. Becca's school called at 8:40 to say that she had fallen in the playground and scraped her knee, not seriously. But they wanted him to know. He took 15 minutes to call the school back, talk to Becca directly on the phone so she could hear his voice, and confirm she was okay before he loaded his van. The envelope stayed on the counter until noon. When he opened it, he found 2 things. A check made out to Marcus Aldridge in the amount of $14,000 and a handwritten note on plain white paper. The note said, "I saw what happened on Thursday. My son Owen is many things, most of them good, but what he did was wrong and he should have known better. This isn't meant to compensate you for one unpaid invoice. You don't need my charity for that. Consider it a long overdue investment in the kind of person who keeps a community honest. I've been watching out for people like you my whole life. I don't find them often." June Hartley Marcus read the note twice. Then he set it on the counter and stood there for a while with his hands at his sides, not sure what to do with the feeling that had come over him. He thought about Carol. He thought about what she would have said. She would have cried a little and tried to pretend she wasn't. Then she would have said something very practical about how to use the money wisely. He thought about Becca's knee and whether it was bad enough to warrant leaving early to pick her up. He thought about Owen Hartley's truck disappearing around the corner of Maple and 3rd, and then he thought about the note. The words that had caught him the most weren't the amount on the check. They were, "I don't find them often." He didn't feel proud of that. He felt something closer to sad, and then something after that was harder to name. He called the number written at the bottom of the note. June Hartley answered on the 3rd ring. "I can't accept this," Marcus said. "I expected you to say that," she said. $14,000 is not. "I know what it is," she said. "I also know what your shop generates in a good month, because my brother looked into it. You're not taking my charity, Marcus. You're accepting a decision I made with my own money for my own reasons. That has nothing to do with you needing it and everything to do with you deserving a leg up." He didn't say anything for a moment. "How did you even find me?" he finally asked. "You were across the street from a bakery," she said. "I was going to get a cinnamon bun. Didn't end up going." He almost laughed. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. The cinnamon bun wasn't that important." She paused. "How's your daughter? I saw her in the window." "She scraped her knee at school this morning." "Ah, those are the ones that always seem worse than they are." Marcus leaned against the counter. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. The shop was quiet in the particular way it got when all the jobs were done and the afternoon hadn't started yet. "I don't know how to say thank you for this," he said. "You don't have to," June said, "but I do have one request." "What's that?" Use some of it to fix the things you've been putting off. I don't mean the shop. I mean whatever it is you've been deferring because the money wasn't quite there. Parents who work the way you do tend to have a list. He was quiet for a long time after they hung up. She was right. He had a list. He picked Becca up at the regular time that afternoon. Her knee had a bandage on it, and she was very proud of herself for not crying at school, even though she said it had definitely hurt. He agreed that it sounded very brave. On the drive home, she asked if they could stop for hot chocolate. He said yes without doing the mental arithmetic he usually did. Just yes. She looked at him sideways from the passenger seat with her little kid instinct for when something had changed. Are you in a good mood? I think so, he said. Yeah. Why? He thought about how to explain it to a 7-year-old. He thought about the note. He thought about June Hartley sitting in a car outside his shop, watching his son drive away without paying, and then deciding to do something about it in her own quiet way. He thought about the words. I don't find them often. Someone did something kind today, he said. Becca considered this. Was it for you? It was. What did they do? They paid attention, Marcus said, when they didn't have to. Becca seemed to find this satisfying, though she probably didn't understand it fully. That's a good thing to do, she said. Yeah, Marcus said. It is. They got hot chocolate from the place on Commercial Drive that Becca liked because it had small tables shaped like tree stumps. Marcus ordered a large one for himself and didn't feel guilty about it. They sat at a tree stump table, and Becca told him about a boy in her class who could whistle through his fingers, which she described as the most impressive thing she had ever witnessed. Marcus listened and nodded and thought about nothing else for a while. That evening after dinner, he sat at the kitchen table and opened a browser on his laptop. He looked up the electrical apprenticeship program at the community college in Kelowna, the one he had been quietly thinking about sponsoring a seat in for a student who couldn't afford the tools. He had thought about it for over a year and always found a reason to wait. He sent them an email that night saying he was interested in speaking about it. Then he looked at the list he kept in the Notes app on his phone, the one with the things he'd been deferring. New fuses for the service van, Becca's winter boots, a chest freezer for the garage to cut down on grocery runs, a donation to the library's children's program that he'd been meaning to make since February. He went through the list slowly, the way you go through something when you're finally ready to close it out. June Hartley did call Owen. She waited a week, and then she called on a Sunday afternoon, which was when Owen was usually home and most likely to actually talk rather than rush off somewhere. She made it brief. She told him she had been in Ridgemont on the Thursday he came to pick up the generator work. She told him she had seen him at the electrical shop. She told him what she thought of it. Owen was quiet for a long time after she finished. I was going to pay him, he said. Were you? Another silence. I should have paid him that day, he said finally. Yes. How much was it? $340. He didn't say anything for a moment. June waited. I'll send it this week, he said. I know you will, she said. And I want you to call him when you do. Not text. Call and apologize properly. Mom, Owen, you know better. He did call. That same Sunday evening, in fact, because his mother's voice when she said you know better had not left his head. Marcus answered on the second ring, and Owen said who he was, and there was a short silence. Then Owen said he was sorry. Not in the way people apologize when they want the conversation to end. In the way people apologize when they know they've done something genuinely small and mean and want you to know that they know it. Marcus accepted it simply. I appreciate the call, he said. Owen transferred the $340 that night with an e-transfer message that just said, for the work. It was good work. Marcus looked at the notification on his phone for a moment, then set it face down on the kitchen table and went to check on Becca, who was supposed to be asleep and almost certainly wasn't. She wasn't. She was reading with a flashlight under her blanket. Bed, Marcus said. 5 more minutes. No more minutes. She sighed with her whole body. Fine. He tucked the blanket in around her shoulders and turned off the flashlight. In the dark, she said, Dad, yeah. Did the man pay? The one who forgot? Marcus paused. He wasn't sure how she knew. She always seemed to know. He did, Marcus said. Was he sorry? I think so. Becca was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. He kissed her forehead and left the room. The apprenticeship sponsorship went through in January. A 22-year-old named Ryan from a small town outside Prince George got the seat. He was the first in his family to do a trade certification. He didn't know where the money had come from. He just knew that a private donor in Ridgemont had made it possible. Marcus never told anyone about it. He went back to his regular work, the panel upgrades and the diagnostic calls and the emergency wiring jobs that came in on Friday afternoons when he was trying to leave early. He kept picking Becca up at 3:15. He kept feeding the ducks on Thursday evenings. The chest freezer went in the garage in November. The winter boots were waterproof and had a buckle Becca thought was elegant. June Hartley sent a Christmas card that arrived 2 days after Christmas, addressed to Marcus and daughter, which Becca found very dignified. Inside the card was a hand-drawn horse. Becca studied it for a full minute. "She draws pretty good," Becca said. "She does," Marcus agreed. "Can we write back?" They did. Becca drew a picture of a duck on lined notebook paper, and Marcus wrote a short note thanking June for the card and for everything else. He kept the note simple. There wasn't very much to say that the things he'd done hadn't already said better. June wrote back in February, a single paragraph. It ended with, "You've made me optimistic, which at my age is not a small thing." Marcus kept the letter in the top drawer of his desk at the shop, behind the owner's manual for the panel tester and a photograph of Carol from a camping trip before Becca was born. He wasn't sure why those things belonged together, but they did. The town of Ridgemont didn't know any of it had happened. There was no news story, no ceremony, no moment that would be talked about for decades. A woman had watched through a window and made a decision. A man had gone home and fed his daughter dinner and put her to bed without knowing anyone was watching. A boy in Prince George got a chance he hadn't expected. That was all. And also, depending on how you looked at it, everything. Becca turned 8 in the spring. Marcus made a cake from scratch for the first time, and it came out slightly lopsided. She pronounced it the best cake she had ever seen. He was fairly certain she was biased. He was also certain he didn't mind. He thought about Carol when he sang her happy birthday. He thought about how much she would have liked watching Becca blow out the candles, the way she scrunched up her face first, like she was preparing for something serious. He thought about how much of raising a child was just being there long enough for them to become themselves. He was there. He intended to keep being there. The unpaid invoice was still in the shop in the folder he kept for resolved files. He had moved it there on the evening Owen transferred the money. He never really thought about it anymore, except occasionally when he was closing up and happened to open the wrong drawer. And then he would think briefly about the afternoon Becca had asked, "Did that man forget to pay?" And the fact that the honest answer at the time had been something harder to explain than forgetting. Some people believed they didn't owe you. That was a different thing. But he didn't think about Owen Hartley very often. He thought about June sometimes, sitting in a car outside his window when she should have been getting a cinnamon bun. He thought about what it meant to pay attention. Not because you would get something from it. Not because anyone would know. Just because you were the kind of person who noticed. He hoped he was that kind of person. He tried to be. He figured Becca would let him know, eventually, whether he'd done it right.